So, hello everyone, and welcome to this Confucius Institute at Coventry University Chinese corner about Dream of Red Mansions. I'm George, and I'm currently the COO of the Coventry University Confucius Institute. Now, before we begin, I would like to have a brief introduction about the Coventry University Confucius Institute. So our mission at the Confucius Institute is to share Chinese language and culture across the West Midlands. In normal days, that would be done by running Mandarin, not Mandarin, Chinese classes for all ages and abilities, which would include running HSK language tests. We also offer cultural experiences and classes for local schools, and we are always looking at ways we can support local business working with Chinese companies and looking to bridge cultural divides between both. If you feel there is something you would like us to do or to work with us, please contact us at the Confucius Institute at coventry.ac.uk and follow us on our Twitter, Insta, Facebook, our social medias all have the handle at ConfuciusCovUni. If you have any trouble finding us, Google is definitely going to be your friend. So today's session, I'm going to be looking at a few overarching things. We're going to look, first of all, at what are the four great novels in Chinese history and literature, and a little bit about why focusing on the Dream of Red Mansions. And I'm going to give a brief overview of the plot and the main events and the characters that I personally enjoy the most, and look at a little bit about what we can learn about traditional Chinese culture. The idea of this session is not to be an in-depth literary review or in-depth. I'm looking to run a sort of introductory session for people who are not aware of these books, and to try to give an overview. As an idea, if you can see this novel, or my version of this novel, is quite large, or it is 4 books long. So there is a lot of information. There is a lot that goes on in this novel. So we will be looking at a simplified view of everything. Yeah, I have read all of this, but not in Chinese. Just to be very clear that my Chinese is certainly nowhere near good enough to read anything beyond basic level books of Chinese. I will say as well today, we have a chat open. We also have the question and answer function. If you do have any questions, if you would like to challenge me, or you would like me to speak more about something, please feel free to say something in the comments in the chat. I love and I very much enjoy answering questions. I find that's an excellent way to make sure that you can get what you need and you are interested in from this session. So please feel free to say hi in the chat. Let me know that you're listening, and if you would like me to say more about a certain thing, I'm very flexible and very happy to help out with what you would like to hear from. So let's begin. Where am I? There we go. So what are the 4 great novels? Now, according to the Chinese idea, in literature, there are 4 great novels in Chinese writing. I've lost my cheat sheet. There are 4 great novels, and these are the 4 great novels. There are Journey to the West, A Dream of Red Mansions, 3 Kingdoms, and Outlaws of the Marsh. Now, 3 Kingdoms and Outlaws of the Marsh, these 2 were both written in around the 14th century. They are very, very, obviously very old, but they are very influential and focused on some historical events at the time. The 3 Kingdoms novel, or otherwise known as the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms, is focused on a time of Chinese history when China was split into 3 warring states. And the Three Kingdoms focuses on the leaders of one of the states and how they interact and how they try to determine the succession against the antagonist in the novel, Cao Cao, who is perhaps the person who is closest to officially retaining the emperor title. The Outlaws of the Marsh is also called Water Margin. I fundamentally dislike this book. I've tried reading it and I didn't enjoy it. I'm sure many people do. I do not recommend it, but it's very interesting. It's sometimes compared to a Robin Hood sort of novel, in that the Outlaws of the Marsh are people who have been or believe they have been poorly treated by the corrupt government and have hidden within the marshes and build up towards a revolution against what's seen as the corrupt government. I personally dislike it, and I personally didn't enjoy it because in the original story, many of those characters of these outlaws are presented as good people, but the descriptions of them within the novel show them to be fundamentally bad people, and I don't particularly want to follow them. There are of course interesting and good characters, but I'm sure my Chinese colleagues would enjoy more discussion, and we may well come to look at these books later on. Journey to the West, or Shioji, is one of perhaps the most popular of the four novels. Well, in fact, without a shadow of a doubt, is the most popular. Journey to the West follows a monkey king called Sun Wukong, as you can see on the character, and was written in the 16th century. Sun Wukong is a magical monkey, a demigod who was born from a stone, and was I hate to use the phrase, but was a very cheeky monkey, and basically through his power took on a war with heaven and the gods within the pantheon of gods within the Buddhist heaven, and became very powerful, but was ultimately stuck under a mountain until the monk, I believe his real life monk Xuanzang, however I may have the name wrong, was sent from China to India to collect some Buddhist writings, and in this romanticization of that journey, Xuanzang, thank you Yiming, I knew I'd have the name wrong, and Xuanzang, and he was joined by Sun Wukong, the monkey, to protect Xuanzang, to protect the monk from other monsters who wanted to eat the monk's flesh to become immortal. There were other monsters. There was a pig man called Zhu Bajie, and a dragon that had become a white horse, as well as a water demon, who all accompanied the monk and protected him. This book is massively popular as for children, especially as there are cartoon versions. There are many movies. There was a very famous Western TV show called Monkey King. Jackie Chan has made movies about this. All of the most famous people have made movies, and a lot of the young children in China, and my daughter also has toys based on this novel. So it's massively influences pop culture. It does become very episodic in its way, and it is certainly a novel that would be worthy of its own Chinese corner in the future. The Dream of Red Mansions is what we will be focusing on today. This is perhaps the latest of these four novels. It was published in the 18th century. It's not entirely clear exactly when, but the first printed versions were published around 1791. Now, this one is my personal favorite, which is why I have chosen to focus on A Dream of Red Mansions, because it is a grand historical epic novel. And it's perhaps the one that's most relevant to understanding aspects of Chinese culture that are still very much present in today's China. So that's why I want to focus on this one today. Although I would recommend reading all of them, or trying to read any of them, if you have some interest in looking at some of the cultural ideas of Chinese history. So moving on, the author of this novel was Cao Shuixin, who we don't have clear dates for his birth and death, but it was around 1715 to 1763. Now, Cao Shuixin came from a very wealthy and influential family back in those days. The Cao family were, well, his I believe his father and grandfathers held the post of textile commissioner in now Nanjing, then Jiangning, which was an influential position, was held in regard. So Cao grew up in a very wealthy, prosperous, and I believe very, very indulged childhood lifestyle until his family was ousted and punished by the Yongzheng emperor. Now, that meant that Cao's father was determined to have been committing financial improprieties. There would have obviously been accusations. Whether or not this is true, or whether there were political machinations behind, whether the family had become too powerful and there were internal plots, we simply won't know. But this is very relevant to the movie, that he grew up in a wealthy aristocratic family as a child. However, that family's fortunes were taken away and he fell into poverty. That's very, very relevant, as that relates very closely to the book. So that also leads very close into his motivations for writing. Why did he write a novel about an aristocratic family? So he chose to write about the experience, and it is believed that this book is almost semi-autobiographical. So the idea that there we can relate very closely to the author and the central character from the novel, both growing up surrounded by excess, surrounded by wealth, surrounded by all the privilege that his position could afford. Now, he also very interestingly aimed to leave a record of what we call the lovely girls he had known as a wealthy child. And that's something that I'm going to take a moment, actually, and I would like to focus on this particular aspect, as in his author's notes, there were, in the author's preface in the original, he does write a little bit about his motivation and why he wanted to write this, and I'll read directly from the author's preface. He stated, and of course translated, "In this busy, dusty world, having accomplished nothing, I suddenly recalled all the girls I had known, considering each in turn, and it dawned on me that all of them surpassed me in behavior and understanding. That I, shameful to say, for all my masculine dignity, fell short of the gentler sex. But since this could never be remedied, it was no use regretting it. There was really nothing to be done. I decided then to make known to all how I, though dressed in silks and delicately nurtured thanks to the imperial favor and my ancestors' virtue, had nevertheless ignored the kindly guidance of my elders as well as the good advice of my teachers and friends, with the result that I had wasted half my life and not acquired a single skill. But no matter how unforgivable my crimes, I must not let all the lovely girls I have known pass into oblivion through my wickedness or my desire to hide my shortcomings. Though my home is now a thatched cottage with matting windows, earthen stove, and rope bed, this shall not stop me from laying bare my heart. Indeed, the morning breeze, the dew of night, the willows by my steps, and the flowers in my courtyard inspire me to wield my brush. Though I have little learning or literary talent, what does it matter if I tell a tale in rustic language to leave a record of all those lovely girls? So for me, I find that a very interesting, very ahead of his time. Yes, Yiming, I find that looking at this motivation he had for writing to really try to show his life, his awareness, and as if you do end up reading the book, you will see that there is a large focus on the women in the family, the young girls that surround the protagonist, and how they are different perhaps than most female characters. There are no, I don't want to say worthwhile, but there are no interesting or complicated female characters in any of the other novels, of those four great novels. However, The Dream of Red Mansions, there are many, and they are varied, and they are wonderful. So you can imagine a young man previously from the noble family in a time where China, the sort of feudal system of China, was coming towards its end, where there were threats of revolution, there was perhaps some general unrest, that there was some strong reactions to this novel. Now, as I've mentioned, this was first printed in 1791. However, before then, this novel would have been hand copied and spread from market stall to market stall and spread from person to person, and this would have really gained some notoriety. It would have apparently the tragic romance aspect of this novel, which I will explain later on when we talk about the plot. This seemed to, or is reported to have, captured the imagination of those who were the young people, particularly who were looking towards this. However, this book was banned in many places, and ultimately what are reported as the people who reported as guardians of feudal morality. I do enjoy that term. I think that's rather interesting. Someone, no doubt, self-proclaimed guardians of feudal morality, chose to ban this book, try to destroy copies. I would imagine this is because the portrayal of the aristocratic family within this novel, the central family, was not doting. It was not a very I don't know what to say, respectful, but it is a sort of warts and all version of the family, which gives some realism and believability. And we can imagine that those who wish to protect the feudal society, wish to protect the idea that the lords, the nobles are better than, did not wish to be seen or portrayed in a way that showed them to be human, with their vanities and their foibles and the relationships and the internal politics. So for me, I love a banned book. I think I love it when a book is banned, simply because of we can now look who is banning the book, why are they banning it, and why does that make me want to read it suddenly. We can look throughout history at some of the banned novels, and many of them might be disappointing when you ultimately read them, but there is a certain attraction towards reading something that people don't want you to. So there's a wonderful background to this novel that goes beyond simply this was a popular book. This was an important novel to be written about a group that was insular, perhaps unknown. Well, that probably were known, but it would have been new for them to be shown in a realistic manner. Now let's move on. So before we move on, please, again, let me know in the chat if you do have any questions, if there is anything you would like me to know about the background of the novel. I don't pretend to be an expert about all of this. I am interested. I'm an interested observer. I've read around the topic. There are some excellent resources. At the front of this novel, there is some excellent essays and introduction towards the historical content that is very, very much worth reading. So, what is the novel about? I think I've mentioned already that this is a novel based around feudal China. This is a novel around an aristocratic family. So that is fundamentally what this is about. The overarching plot of this novel follows the childhood of the young man Jia Baoyu. Now, Jia Baoyu is a massively famous character in Chinese literature. This is someone who is as well known as Romeo or Hamlet, perhaps might be even also interesting. This sort of character who is ubiquitous in Chinese. Just every single person will have an idea of who this person is with or without reading the novel. So Jia Baoyu has been born into this aristocratic Jia family, and he becomes the favorite. And the novel follows his childhood, his adolescence, as he grows within this novel, and follows the family and their reactions surrounding his childhood and the political or the internal politics of this family. And as he grows, as they interact with society at large, as their fortunes rise, as their fortunes fall, it's a massively complex book, or books, a series of books that fundamentally show the rise and fall of this Jia family, surrounding the growth, surrounding Baoyu as he grows. Now, as I mentioned, Baoyu is the central protagonist of this novel. This picture there, this is taken from one of the many TV shows and movies and plays that have been made around this book. I wonder if my Chinese colleagues have favorites for them. But Baoyu is very much the central protagonist. This is a book about him. Now, there are many aspects of this book that are somewhat unbalanced and lean into the supernatural. But those are generally related to almost the beginning and the end of the novel. As you say here, he was born with a magical piece of jade in his mouth, and this is something that is related to the beginning. There is a stone that he keeps with him throughout his life and is almost a talisman of the fortune of the family. And when he is born, there are some, certainly at the start of this novel, there are some supernatural elements of the religion, and those are sort of brought back right towards the end. But for the vast majority of the novel, it is very much grounded in the family. Now, Baoyu is the son of Jia Zhen, and Jia Zhen is the second son of the Dowager. Now, the Dowager we will come to in a moment, but his name Baoyu also means treasured jade. Indeed, that is true. Something I didn't put in here, but his name is very much related to this. Now, Baoyu is very much the favorite of the family. He's the favorite of the Dowager, the matriarch of this family. But he is certainly not interested in doing his studies. He is not the good son in many ways. He's not interested in study. He wants to enjoy his leisure time. He's a very, very spoiled young man. You can imagine he's he prefers to read and spend time with his many female relatives that are living within this house. It's worth saying at the moment, the novel is has a wealth of characters. There are maybe 40 odd characters, and when I was reading this book, perhaps the most useful page in the novel is at the beginning. There is a family tree, which lets us know exactly who is who and how they relate to each other, which is very important, as Bao Yu's future wife is related to him via certain ways. The love is related to him. The characters are all related to each other in various ways. So this this is perhaps the page that I kept coming back to the most from the novel, to keep flicking back, say, who is that? Bao Yu is there. He loves to spend time with and mess around with his female relatives, and not only his relatives, but also his servants, the serving girls that surround him. They are also integral people within this novel. He's romantically linked to Lin Daiyu. Now, the central romance, as I've mentioned earlier, the attraction for many young people in this novel was the tragic romance. We say tragic romance between Jia Baoyu and Lin Daiyu. And this is perhaps where many people will try to show similarity and parallels towards Romeo and Juliet. So it is Jia Baoyu and Lin Daiyu are often described, or have been described, as the Chinese version of a Romeo and a Juliet. Their romance is central to the novel. However, for me, it is perhaps one of the least interesting parts of the novel. I would come to that later on. Lin Daiyu and Jia Baoyu are both, they're close friends. They grow up together, but ultimately are not bound to be together. So when we look at Lin Daiyu, again seen as the Juliet, she is she is the maternal granddaughter of the dowager. So what that means is the dowager married into the Jia family, and her sons became Jia's, and that the fortunes of the family would follow her son, her first son. If I come back to this one, her first son, Jia Shi, and they would take the central role in the family. Her daughters would have been married off to other families, and they would leave her family. They would not be regarded as part of the Jia family. They would be then now regarded as part of the other family. So it was a little unusual. It would seem a little unusual for Lin Daiyu to be brought back into the Jia household as a maternal granddaughter. So she is the outsider within that house in many ways. She is someone who was brought in after her parents passed away. So this sets up a bit of the relationship between Lin Daiyu and the other members of the household through this already rather complex web. And again, I would remind you, please ask questions if I'm not making sense. It is a complex novel. Lin Daiyu is described as beautiful, witty, but physically frail. One of the key character traits that she has is her illness. She is constantly ill, constantly seeking help, and her the way she's presented is someone who needs help, who constantly needs help. Despite her intellect, her ability with poetry, and her beauty, she is frail. She is very ill, and in the novel, she is described as having a heart like Bigan, yet even more intelligent, and with an illness like Caesar, but even more beautiful. Those are other characters from the Chinese literary canon. She's seen somewhat almost as an ideal for the traditional expectations of a wife. She's somewhat smart, but she's docile, beautiful yet quiet. And for me, as such, she is one of the least interesting characters in the novel. When I've had many discussions about this with my students, with other people, but for myself, Lin Dayu is not a character who I found particularly captivating or interesting. In fact, it has been we've often been described as someone who she spends a lot of time crying, a lot of time unhappy, and she has been described as a person who cries, and then she dies. She's unfortunately, for myself, not the most interesting character. However, the romance, perhaps what we can learn from this is that the beauty is more important. The ideal of having this smart, beautiful character, very high maintenance girl. Yes, as Yiming has pointed out, she's very high maintenance, and compared to the others, compared to people else in the household, she's not seen as the strongest. And we'll compare her to one of the other female characters in just a moment. I've mentioned already the dowager. Now, of course, this picture is not of the dowager. This is one of China's empress, but it gives us the idea she was a hugely powerful figure within the family. Obviously, anyone with the name of a dowager tends to be a character with great power and great influence. So she oversees the Jia household and the Jia family. She is massively powerful. As I've referred to her before as the matriarch, she runs all aspects of the Jia family. Now, she dotes on her grandson, Bao Yu. Basically, she indulges his every whim, and whenever his father, Bao Yu's father, is frustrated at him for not being the good son, he will run to his grandmother, and the grandmother will protect, indulge, and keep him happy. So she is obviously a character who is able to be massively competent, massively intelligent, and must be somewhat ruthless to maintain her position. The Jia family is very wealthy. It has many many servants who she will have to control, who have their own. The servants have their own internal political machinations. The extended family, have their own machinations, each vying for her favor. There are many people who are looking for favor from outside to try to come in. Trying to balance these roles, trying to maintain power, trying to help maintain the family's position within society is a daunting task, and something that she has grown into, and she has cemented her position as such that she is untouchable within the clan. I think it's somewhat fair to say. So we come now to Wang Shifeng. The dowager is the most popular figure. Wang Shifeng, notice that Wang is not she is the family name that is different from Jia family. She is not from the Jia family. She is someone who married into the Jia family. Now, her looks, her personality, and her intelligence allowed her to gain the respect of the dowager, unlike many of the young ladies in the novel. So many of the young ladies in the novel are not seen as, or certainly not seen by the dowager as, worthy successors to herself. It's very interesting that Wang Shifeng is seen as this. Now, Wang Shifeng is I'm not entirely sure, she married Jia Baoyu's cousin. So she married the oldest grandson of the Dowager. So her husband's father was the first son of the Dowager. Again, I am checking the book. It is complicated. And the Wang family was another very, very wealthy family. Interestingly, she is also directly related to Jia Baoyu's mother. Jia Baoyu's mother is the Lady Wang. So again, as we say, there are lots of internal relationships that complicate matters. For myself, Wang Shifeng is above and beyond my favorite character in all four of these traditional Chinese novels, and amongst almost any Chinese media that I have seen. I absolutely adore this character in a way that Lin Daiyu I have very little time for. She is the most complex and interesting character in the novel, and she furiously and ruthlessly protects her dignity and her position as a woman and her position as a wife within the family. I would love to hear the response to my Chinese colleagues who have read the book, but this is a biased this is definitely a somewhat biased with regard to this book. But Wang Shifeng, I like to compare her to Lin Daiyu, as both of them come externally from the family. Throughout the novel, Lin Daiyu never takes the action or never takes the initiative to cement her position as an external person, someone coming into this family. She is constantly allowing herself to be the outsider, and she does not step up to take any sort of responsibilities. And this is something that we can contrast, that is very interesting to contrast with Wang Shifeng, who is also an outsider. All of the sons have wives. They would be very easy to be pushed aside, to be separate from the family. However, Wang Shifeng, through her strength of character, builds her position so that she is very much the successor to the Dowager. She takes control of the running of the household later through the novel. She runs and organizes these servants and the help with an iron fist is very much worthy to say. And she also ends up being running the purse, the family purse, the money in the family. And unfortunately, her actions and the lending that she does, her predatory lending, it's realistic to say, ultimately lead to the downfall of the Jia family. She is directly responsible to the overall downfall of what happens. So for me, following Wang Shifeng, her character, her humor, her drive make it. And exactly, and Yiming has said there, Wang Shifeng could be a successful woman in the modern world. She's got stronger personality and she's massively practical. This is why I'm perhaps drawn to her as a character. She's someone who would, her strength of character would allow her to be successful almost any time period. So we've looked at a couple of the characters, and it's worth saying there are over 40 sort of central characters, and I am missing many of them. So it's, hopefully, to reiterate, this is trying to give you a taste of the novel that you might wish to go and learn more. So let's look at some of the key aspects of the plot. So as I've mentioned, this novel follows the rise and decline of the Jia family, and it also provides some commentary of some of the various conflicts in this feudal period. There is some commentary and highlights about the conflicts and the difficult positions between being someone's wife and there being concubines. So in this period of Chinese history, the men of the family would have multiple wives and multiple concubines, depending on their level of power and what they could afford, ultimately. So, in the sort of not distant future, polygamy, having wives, multiple concubines, was a social symbol in many ways. However, this novel does look at how that would affect the internal position of a wife. How should you, as a wife, respond to your husband getting a second wife, getting another wife, getting a concubine? How can you deal with that? How would you deal as a second wife coming into an established relationship? These are very difficult things to think about. We can also look at the ideas. There was slaves, masters, the relationships, the power dynamics between people with wealth, people with poverty, and the ideas duty versus love. Who should you marry? Jia Baoyu is destined to he has this great love, but Lin Daiyu cannot bring anything towards him. She cannot do this. So should you marry the person who is going to promote your position? Should you marry the person who will be the correct good wife to you and society, or should you marry the idea? Yeah. As Yimi says, wife was more like a job, managing the household and concubines, other than the relationship. Indeed, very much. It's a very good comment to try to suggest that we shouldn't really look at the idea of wife, and that comes again to love. Do you end up loving your wife, or is this person someone who's helping you out? There are some central elements towards the there are some central elements to the plot which highlight these. So I've mentioned the tragic romance, which is the most famous aspect of the plot, the love story between Bao Yu and Lin Daiyu. However, as I've said, as Lin Daiyu is an orphan from the female side of the dowager's family, her position within family and society generally is not high. She does not have a high position. She is also not someone who the dowager particularly respects, I believe. I think she's someone she feels she likes, but does not feel that she has any strength of character. So she, along with Wang Shifeng, decide that Jia Baoyu is definitely not going to marry Lin Daiyu. In fact, they have someone very different to the Baoyu should marry. And ultimately, they trick Baoyu into marrying someone deemed more appropriate. Now, this seems somewhat confusing, perhaps, to us today. How can you trick someone into marrying? But if we look at this, the picture that I've chosen for this, we would see that in traditional Chinese wedding ceremonies, the groom would not see the bride's face. The bride would be brought towards the groom wearing a red hood of forms. And there are many instances in Chinese books, novels, ideas where the groom would be somewhat surprised when the veil is lifted to say, wow, oh no, her. So in this case also, Bao Yu has a similar reaction when he is ultimately married off to, if I'm someone else. It's Shui Bao Chai, I believe. So this relationship that is built between Bao Yu and Lin Daiyu is ultimately pushed aside by the elders of the family to say that you cannot marry this person. This person is not right for you. You will marry who we want you to marry, and that is someone who is responsible, someone who is also brought up towards, similar to Shifeng, someone who is also going to be potentially running the household. So that would be another one of the somewhat related, Shui Bao Chai, I believe, who is a cousin of sorts. Thank you. So we have this dichotomy, Shui Bao Chai, who's grown up, and throughout the novel, she is a better fit for the family, for society. She's smart, she's responsible, she is what we should be, whereas Lin Daiyu is the appealing, ethereal beauty. So tragic romance can show us. And I've highlighting the garden because she's Wang Shifeng 2.0. Thank you. She's Wang Shifeng 2.0. I would say she is a better version of Wang Shifeng, which makes her less interesting. she's a more responsible, perhaps a nicer version of Wang Shifeng. But there are also different takes. I've mentioned the next part is the garden. There's a large part of this novel is about the garden, as Bao Yu's sister Yuan Chen becomes selected and becomes a concubine to the emperor, which in those days is a massively highly respected position. So this is a massive fortune for the Jia family, and there is a large storyline where they build this new garden. There's a large focus on the architecture of the garden, the layout of the garden, and how the young ladies of the family use this garden. This becomes a central part of the family home, where there are the groups of young ladies. They grow there. This is essential to where they play, they write poetry, and there are occasionally even playing drinking games. And generally, this is where we see a lot of the life, the relationships, the growing happening. And I like this sort of storyline because it's looking at, again, what's the culture of the time, what's the necessity, what are the needs, and how do people interact with one another in those days. And that for me is a very important element. And I come back to this because my favorite key plots, again, are the adventures. I call them the adventures of Wang Shifeng, because as I've mentioned, the way that she tries to cement her position is fascinating and, well, ruthless. So as I've mentioned, she's the most interesting character. Her husband is described as something of a womanizer. He has affairs, and they can embarrass her. She finds him more than once, in bed with serving girls, and she is a very proud woman who does not want to accept this. Of course, however, she is a woman in 18th century China, so she does not have any internal power. She's also an outsider to the Jia family. So how can she do this? She doesn't necessarily have the direct power to make some things happen. So in one of two of my favorite adventures to her, there is one short plot area where she is propositioned inappropriately by a minor member of the family, someone a young man who decides to try his luck with her, I think is perhaps the way we can describe what happens in the novel. And she's not particularly happy about this, to say the least. So she humiliates him and ultimately causes his death. As what she does is she manipulates him. She tricks him, and it's rather amusing, through what at the time is an amusing series where she tells him to wait underneath her window, as they can perhaps have some sort of tryst, and making him believe that they were going to start an affair. However, once she manipulates him so that eventually he is hiding underneath her window, frightened to move for fear of being discovered, while Wang Shifeng and her maids throw a large bucket of water over him, so he spends the night too afraid to move, covered in water, which then leads to him becoming rather ill and ultimately dying. As I've said, Wang Shifeng is not a particularly nice person, but she is not someone who is willing to be embarrassed. She's not someone she is always willing to fight her corner and make sure that she gets exactly what she wants. Now that's a more almost amusing one. It is amusing, but it's as we think that boy somewhat deserves his fate. However, the next sort of large adventure was when she finds her position threatened by a new wife. Her husband finds a new wife, And this wife, her husband is not entirely a fool, as he does try to hide the wife from Wang Shifeng. He tries to keep this wife a little secret, but of course Wang Shifeng ultimately does find out and tricks and betrays the new wife Yuajie, and ultimately, through her machinations, Yuajie is ultimately she dies through suicide. So when I look at Wang Shifeng as my favorite, it's not because she is a nice person in any sense of the term, but she is powerful and she is the smartest, and she has claws that she is not afraid to use, I think is perhaps a way to describe her. And again, I could go on about Wang Shifeng. She is my favorite character from literature. What can we learn from this novel as we get on? So I've managed to speak for nearly 50 minutes, so please jump in with any questions. What can we learn from this novel? Now, broadly speaking, I think that Chinese culture is based on the traditional. Most Chinese will say that China is a traditional country, and that is, from what I saw living there for 11 years, generally true. There is a lot of recognizable behavior from this novel, which we can see in modern society in China today. So for me, reading this novel provides a background to some of those elements of etiquette and family relations which are around today, including the expectations of boys versus boys and girls, the sons and daughters. There are different expectations we see today, and we hear about even in the sort of the more progressive parts of China. There are traditional expectations of girls and boys. The boys will have the expectation to have the job. The girls will have more of the traditional expectation to be married off before a certain age, before they become I've forgotten the name, but before they become leftover women. There is very much this awareness of traditional. Very Jane Austen indeed. there is a large Jane Austen vibe in this. I think I would very much like to see see a visit. That would be a rather interesting literary crossover if the Bennets could come and join the Jar family. I would very much like to see that. There is a large importance of respecting elders. So the matriarch of the family is there. Everyone must respect the elders within the family. The idea that the mothers, the wives, the women of the family would hold the purse ties. Now, traditionally in China, even today, we see many husbands are expected to pass their earnings to the wife, who would run the finance of the family. I think that's perhaps something that's less in sort of the modern cities. Do this. So, and we come back well to the concept of face. Face is massively important in China today, in your relationships, in every relationship you have through the power structures within the family, within people outside. Face is fundamental. And we could talk so much about all of these. Now, we have a couple of questions, and I'm happy with this. Yiming has asked, many Chinese talk about the ideal wife between Lin Daiyu and Shui Baochai. What do you think? Or I prefer Wang Shifeng. Now, as much as I love Wang Shifeng, I do not think that I would like to be married to her. So I think, and I definitely don't think that I would like to be married to Lin Daiyu. So the first one that I would certainly choose is Shui Baochai, without a shadow of a doubt, for marriage. I like Wang Shifeng very much as a character. This is not perhaps someone I would like to perhaps be romantically involved with. That I think would be somewhat scary. Marco, you've asked how popular is this novel and perhaps the other three in today's China. I think that's a question I would love Yiming or my Chinese colleagues to jump in, because that's something they would be able to say more. As I mentioned, The Journey to the West is massively popular. It's absolutely saturated in Chinese culture for the young people. I would look after that. I would think this Hong Lo Meng would be the second most popular, and I think it's probably well known. Similar, but I would imagine these are similar to Shakespeare. The four novels, for what we would look at in the UK as sort of Shakespeare or Austen or Dickens, they are the massive pillars of the literary canon. So they will certainly be discussed in schools, and they would certainly be part of the stories that the children grow up and are discussed within and around families. Ji Hong Lee asks, so in our culture, what is the most difficult storyline to understand in this book? I think the understanding is not perhaps somewhat difficult. The most difficult or the most unusual storyline, I think, is for me, it's the different wives and the concubines, the relationships between them, because I think that's something for our culture we don't have a history of having, or certainly not a recent history of having many wives at the same time and concubines, and balancing that side of things and the etiquette between them. So for me, that is something which was alien to most of the literature that I would grow up consuming. As you say, Shakespeare does not have multiple wives. We don't see multiple wives in Dickens or Austen or Bronte or any of these sort of similarly timed novels. So thank you. That's a great story. What is the Red Mansion reference about? I will throw that one back out to Yi Ming or anyone else. What is it? Hong Lo Meng. So the Dream of Red Mansions. I would also say there are various titles. The Red Mansion, I'm not 100% sure. There are others who focused that an original title of this was The Story of the Stone, based around the Bao Yu stone that was in his mouth when he was born. The Red Mansion, I'm afraid you've stumped me. That's a great question, Marco. If Yiming or anyone else would like to jump in to answer that, please do. Please feel free. If we have, are there any other questions or comments, questions, ideas? As I've said, we've come very much to the end of our hour. I've very much enjoyed talking about this. I hope that you've been able to find something interesting about this, and if I have piqued your interest. We have a raised hand. Hello. Please join in the question or the chat. Let me see. We have a raised hand. So I'm afraid I'm not going to try to pronounce your name. I will certainly get it wrong. So please join us. If you've got a raised hand, please write something in the chat or say there. What's inspired me to write this novel? Thank you. I'm going to say, why did I write about this novel? I certainly did not write this novel. It was thank you for the question. It was written in the 18th century, but I chose to write about this novel present about this novel because for me, I find this the most interesting and realistic view of Chinese culture that I have read out of all of the four novels. So whereas the Journey to the West is fascinating, it's interesting, and it's a great place to learn about Buddhist culture and some of the gods, I found it a little bit repetitive, and I didn't really understand the relationships. And as interesting as many parts of it were, I didn't choose this one. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, again, was too far back to be relevant to what I see today. it was very much ancient China, so in the 14th century, and it was hard to. I was also less interested in this because the armies and the attitudes towards honor and the way that people did, I found very different and difficult, harder to relate to. And I've talked about the waters, the outlaws of the marsh, which I just didn't like. But this novel, I could relate to this. I saw this as similar to almost similar to things like War and Peace, Anna Karenina, these epic novels, and we could see the humanity and the relatable relationships between the family, the way that people talked to one another, the way that people behaved towards one another was relatable, was recognizable, and was enjoyable in many ways, because I could relate that to what I see living in Chinese culture. I could relate that to what I see between the way that my friends and my family, my Chinese family, would talk to each other. We could see where those behaviors would link to or be related to what was in the novel. So this is why I chose this one. It's available on Amazon, so go and wish it. Please do. I'll suggest, I got this one from Amazon. I was very fortunate, actually. When I was living in China, my wife bought me all 4 sets from all four novels, and I worked my way through all of them, which is why I chose this one. So it is after 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I've really enjoyed putting this together. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and that is the end of our session. We're going to finish there, so please go and get some lunch, and I hope you all have a wonderful and enjoyable weekend.